Today we're going to look at one of the books in wisdom literature called the Song of Songs or the Song of Solomon. I want to give you a couple of definitions that you'll remember if you watched the last video. The first one is, what is wisdom literature addressing? What is the question it's asking? And the question is, how do I live in this world? How do I live in this world? And so the Song of Solomon is going to answer the question, how do I live in this world sexually? It's going to approach God's understanding of creating sex and the parameters He puts around us. Second definition I want to remind you of is, what is wisdom? What is a wise person? It's someone who becomes an expert in living or walking within the boundaries of God's protection. So, when it comes to wisdom about sex in this culture, we have to do a couple of things. We have to believe that God created this world and in His wisdom set up parameters or principles for how the world is supposed to operate. We have to believe that He knows what's best for us. And then we have to know that we're going to do our best as wise people to become experts in living within those parameters. So let's just talk about sex for a second before we get into Song of Solomon. First of all, we talk about God defining sex as between a man and a woman. You hear that a lot in homosexual discussions. Well, God defines sex between a man and a woman. That's not true. God defines sex between a husband and a wife. That's how God defines sex. And it's one of the greatest gifts He's given us. It is a gift that He's given to husband and wives to practice within the context of marriage. And within the context of marriage between husband and wife, I'm just going to tell you, I don't know that there's anything better in this world. I don't know that there's anything that brings more pleasure and intimacy and connectedness between that marriage relationship than sex. So I will say that first off. However, the other side of that page is, that's the parameter that God set down. And He said, what? Wise people are going to walk in my parameters. And we say, well, why does God just want to ruin all of our sex lives? Why didn't He want us to have fun? Because God set the principles of this world in order, and so He knows what brings pleasure, and He knows what brings pain. And so that's His parameter, because here's reality. Nothing causes more pain and more heartache and more suffering in this world than misplaced sex and sexuality outside of the parameters that God has designed sex to be. I'm just going to list some. I'm not going to talk about it. I'm just going to list them, and you think about it. An affair. Adultery. Rape. Incest. Sexual abuse. Passion-related crimes. Murder. Kidnapping, blackmail. The list goes on and on and on. The pain that is caused by sex outside of God's parameters. And God says, I've given you something that might be the best thing I've given anybody. I mean, this is the most amazing thing I've created here, is this whole idea of sexuality. But I put a pretty tight boundary around it, and let me tell you why. I created in my wisdom the world, and I know the principles for how the world works, and I understand that, and I created you to live within my principles, and if you'll live within my principles, you're going to have a great life. That's wisdom literature, right? You get out of my principles, there's going to be a lot of pain and suffering. Not because God hates us, not because He's mad at us, not because He's punishing us. It's because that's the principles of the way it's set up. And so what I'm going to do in the Song of Songs is for a husband and his wife. And I'm going to take you through the beauty of sex, but just remember the context. It's within the context of husband and wife. So, a couple of things. 1 Kings 4:32 says this. Solomon spoke 3,000 proverbs, and his songs numbered 1,005. The Song of Songs, the book, the Song of Songs, or the Song of Solomon, is the greatest of all ancient Middle Eastern songs. So he wrote 1,000 songs, and this was his best one. And how do I know it's his best one? Because I read the first verse of the Song of Songs. It says, this is Solomon's Song of Songs, more wonderful than any other song. So in other words, Solomon had all these proverbs, 3,000 of them. He wrote 1,000 songs, but no song's better than this song, because this is a 4-act play or a 4-scene play that's a musical about sex. And it just doesn't get any better than that. And he says it's the greatest of all the songs. It tells me something about the nature of God. If God's going to take basically a play and put it in Scripture to describe marital love and marital bliss and how it's supposed to function, that tells me God cares about my sex life, He cares about my sex drive, He cares about sex in general, and He wants us to enjoy the gift He gives us, and He wants to protect us from us using sex to destroy our lives. And that's what the Song of Solomon or the Song of Songs is all about. Now, the setting is in the garden. And in Scripture, when things are about the garden, it's usually some sort of reference back to the Garden of Eden, not literally, but the Garden of Eden was where things were the way they were created to be, right? So basically what he's saying is, because the context is a garden, here is sex within the context of marriage the way it was designed to be. And so he's going to tell us what that looks like. I know it's an uncomfortable subject, and I know it's hard for you to imagine. It's like religion has taught us, sex is bad, sex is bad, sex is bad, you can't have sex, and then you get married, well, okay, go ahead. And all of a sudden, the thing that was so bad in your life is now all of a sudden okay, but nobody's told me why it was bad or why it's good now, and nobody tells me the ins and outs, and it just gets so messy. And Satan is winning the battle in our culture in this issue because the church won't talk about it. We won't sit down and talk about it. So I'm going to talk about it in this video. Okay, so let's get started. This play has 3 characters. There's the husband called the lover, the wife called the beloved, and the daughters of Jerusalem that are friends. It's divided into 4 scenes. These scenes are just the basic understanding of how marriage sex works, the realities of it. And I think when we get done, you're going to go, yeah, I get it. So scene 1 is the courtship of lovers. They're not married yet, but they're ready to get married. They're about to get married. So it begins in 1:2. The young woman speaks. Kiss me and kiss me again, for your love is sweeter than wine. How fragrant your cologne, your name is like its spreading fragrance. No wonder all the young women love you. Take me with you. Come, let's run. The king has brought me into his bedroom. Then we go down to verse 8. If you don't know, O most beautiful woman, follow the trail of my flock and graze your young goats by the shepherd's tents. You are as exciting, my darling, as a mare among Pharaoh's stallions. How lovely are your cheeks, your earrings set them afire. How lovely is your neck, enhanced by a string of jewels. We will make for you earrings of gold and beads of silver. Now here's what I want you to notice. This is the man speaking for the first time. Think about Middle Eastern culture. Women dress pretty well from head to toe, so he's never seen her hair. What has he seen? He's seen her cheeks, her eyes, her neck, her ears, and that's about all he's seen. And so he talks about those right here, talking about your lovely cheeks, your earrings, your neck. He's talking about that part of her face that he can see. That's the only thing he's ever seen of her. But he imagines her because he's so impassioned for her. His sex drive is strong and he is ready to make love to her. The young woman says back to him in verse 12, the king is lying on his couch, enchanted by the fragrance of my perfume. My lover is like a sachet of myrrh lying between my breasts. He is like a bouquet of sweet henna blossoms from the vineyards of En-Gedi. The young man comes back and says, how beautiful you are, my darling, how beautiful. Your eyes are like doves. See, now he's talking about her eyes. The young woman, you are so handsome, my love, pleasing beyond word. The soft grass is our bed. And so they go back and forth in this first scene of this musical, talking about how beautiful they are and how they turn one another on and how much they're ready to have sex. But there is no sex. And it ends in 3:5, and this is the kind of the crescendo of scene 1. So just imagine a play, a musical, and the whole musical is about sex. And this young couple, they're dating, and they're ready to get married, and they're ready to have sex. But here's how scene 1 ends. 3:5. Promise me, O women of Jerusalem, by the gazelles and the wild deer, not to awaken love until the time is right. Of course, the parameter God has set down for the time to be right is what? Marriage. So step 1 in this beautiful sexual encounter between husband and wife is, let's wait till we're married to have sex. And so in the middle of this courtship, they're talking about it, and they're saying, oh boy, we can't hardly wait. And you know what, sweetheart, I haven't seen much of you yet, but your eyes and your ears and your cheekbones are driving me crazy, and I'm ready to go. And she's saying, oh, I can't hardly wait to have you in my arms. Come be with me. But the Song of Solomon ends 3:5 by saying, but that first stage of courtship, don't arouse love. Don't awaken love until it's time. Graphic. What's the problem with having sex before marriage? Answer. Because you don't know what you don't know. If 2 virgins get married, they don't know what they don't know. In other words, if there's a scale of sexual performance between 1 and 10, and the guy's a 5 and the girl's a 4, if they're virgins when they get married, they don't know that they're a 5 and a 4. They think they're both 12s. But when you start having multiple partners, you start comparing. Well, boy, I had a girlfriend back here. She was really good. She was a 9. Boy, this girl over here, she was a 6, so we broke up. Oh, I fell in love with my wife, but then we got married and I found out she was a 4. So now, you know what? All I can think about is that 9. And they never are allowed to come together and build that sexual intimacy the way God designed it. Because when you give your body away in sex before marriage, then you've lost the innocence of not knowing what you don't know, and you're carrying in there these sexual experiences that become a barrier to enjoying sex with your partner the way you designed it. That's why God put that parameter around. Okay? Scene 2. Scene 2 is the honeymoon, the first couple of years of marriage. It's that first season of marriage where you just can't get enough. It is 3:6 through 5:1. I'm going to begin in 4:1. You are beautiful, my darling, beautiful beyond words. Your eyes are like doves behind your veil. Your hair falls in waves like a flock of goats winding down the slopes of Gilead. Now, he's never seen her hair before, right? So now the honeymoon is where you pull down the hair for the first time. He finally sees her hair, so he's describing it. This was a compliment. And if you're a man, you need to compliment your wife's hair. I would not say that it's like a flock of goats winding down the slopes of Gilead. I would use something a little more advanced and a little more appropriate than that. But he's impressed with her hair. Your teeth are as white as sheep, recently shorn and freshly washed. This is my favorite one. Your smile is flawless, each tooth matched with its twin. In other words, what he's saying to her is, you got all your teeth, baby. I had no idea. I love your teeth. You got every one of them. He continues on, your lips are like scarlet ribbon. Your mouth is inviting. Your cheeks are like rosy pomegranates behind your veil. Your neck is as beautiful as the Tower of David, jeweled with the shields of 1,000 heroes. Your breasts are like 2 fawns, twin fawns of a gazelle grazing among the lilies. Before the dawn breezes blow and the night shadows flee, I will hurry to the mountain of myrrh and to the hill of frankincense. What's he talking about? He's talking about intercourse. You are altogether beautiful, my darling, beautiful in every way. Come with me from Lebanon, my bride. Come with me from Lebanon. Verse 9, you have captured my heart, my treasure, my bride. You hold it hostage with one glance of your eyes. So now, for the first time, he's seeing her body. And what? He's describing all of these things about her body that he loves. He's seeing it for the first time. And he describes it in somewhat detail. Come down to verse 12. You are my private garden, my treasure, my bride. Remember that phrase, private garden. A secluded spring, a hidden fountain. Your thighs shelter a paradise of pomegranates with rare spices. He's talking about her vagina. He says, you are a garden, verse 15, a well of fresh water streaming down from Lebanon's mountains. And the young woman says, awake, north wind, rise up, south wind. What's she talking about? She says, here's my garden. He's described her body. She says, rise up and come to me. Blow on my garden and spread its fragrance all around. Come into your garden, my love. Taste its finest fruits. I have entered my garden, my treasure, my bride. I gather myrrh with my spices and eat honeycomb with my honey. I drink wine with my milk. O lover and beloved, eat and drink, yes, drink deeply of your love. Now, it doesn't take too much intelligence to read this poetry and know exactly what they're talking about. They're talking about that first year or two of marriage when you're just exploring one another's bodies. Okay, two virgins get married and they don't know much about it, but they're so excited and they just can't get enough. You remember when you first got married? I've been married 38 years, and I remember that first year. I mean, when the sun came up, that was a reason to make love. And when the sun went down, there's a second reason to make love. And I had a friend tell me before I got married, he said, if you'll take a jar and the first year you're married, every time you have sex, you put a nickel in the jar. And then starting in year 2, every time you have sex, you take a nickel out, it'll take you 10 years to empty the jar. And of course, he was being facetious, but there's some truth to that. That first year or two, you just can't get enough of each other. Lust is just all around, but not sinful lust, lust for each other, the way God designed it. Husband and wife, and they're discovering this together for the first time, and it's beautiful, and it's amazing, and it's awesome, and let's do it, and let's do it again, and let's do it again, and I can't get enough. That's scene 2. Scene 2 is just after it. And I'm sure you remember those days, but here's what you need to know about married love and sex. It was not designed by God to stay that way. It's not designed for 30 years later you still have that same passion. It's just not realistic. It's just not the way it works. And I just want to say, I'm an old guy now. I'm 60 years old. God didn't design my body to function the same way sexually as it did when I was 20. Because things change in marriage. You enjoy that first year or two, but that's not reality. And what happens sometimes when we misunderstand sex and we think that marriage is sex and that's all it is, and then you get into those middle stages of marriage where it's not as frequent, we can get really frustrated to the point of almost wanting to throw the marriage away. And that's what gets a lot of people into trouble with affairs and adultery and all sorts of other things, is there's this unrealistic expectation about how God designed sex to be in a marriage. And that leads us to scene 3, because scene 3 is confusion. It's really a lot of confusion in this marriage. So this is 5:2 through 6:13. And I'm going to read 2 and 3. Verse 2. The young woman says, I slept, but my heart was awake when I heard my lover knocking and calling. Open to me, my treasure, my darling, my dove, my perfect one. My head is drenched with dew, my hair with the dampness of night. Now, understand that they lived in separate quarters, okay? And so he walked from his to hers, and he was walking outside, and it's the middle of the night, and he's knocking on the door, and he's like, I'm still in the honeymoon phase, baby. I like it every day, sometimes twice a day, and I'm coming back and I'm ready. But you know what? Life is starting to get in the way for her. But I responded, I've taken off my robe. Should I get up and get dressed again? I've washed my feet. Should I get them soiled? In other words, I'm already in bed. I don't want to get out of bed. I don't want to get my feet dirty. I don't want to get on my robe. I don't want to answer the door. Just go back to your own place. I'm just not in the mood. Do you remember when the kids started coming along and you have your job and she has her job and you're both working and you got 2 little kids or 3 little kids or 1 little kid and you're not sleeping much and But especially in the early days, they're not sleeping through the night and you're exhausted all the time. And you go and you approach your wife to make love, and what does she say? Not tonight, honey, I've got a headache. And it becomes the big joke, right? But it's not the big joke. It's reality of marriage. There just comes these times in marriages. Marriages are full of peaks and valleys. They're full of these different times in the marriage. And early marriage is a time for frequent sex. And then you get into a rhythm with those little kids where it's going to be a time where there's not a whole lot of room for frequent sex. Doesn't mean sex isn't going to happen. It just means it's not going to be every time you want it. You have to understand that's just a part of being married. But what I want you to notice out of this, and this is brilliant, 6:2, the young woman says, my lover has gone down to his garden, to his spice beds, to browse in the gardens and gather the lilies. Now, if the garden is the euphemism for sex, and she's saying, come to my garden, well, all of a sudden, he's not coming to her garden as much because her garden isn't open for business. And so it doesn't say here that he goes to another garden, although that's what happens sometimes. She said he goes to his garden. Well, you know what he's talking about. He's talking about self-fulfillment. He's talking about masturbation, I think. And this is what happens in marriages, and I'm going to try to say this as sensitively as I can, but it's so important to understand that what happens sometimes in marriage is a woman says no, and a woman says no, and a woman says no, and a man says, well, I have a right to have an orgasm, so I'm just going to go take care of myself. And so he begins to take care of himself, but not only that, he brings in porn, and porn adds a whole other dimension to it because in a lot of ways, pornography is sex not as it was intended to be, and a lot of what you see on porn is not something that you would actually participate in common marriage sex anyway. And so it gives him these unrealistic expectations about what it should look like and what it should be like and how she should respond. And he starts taking care of himself, and the more he takes care of himself, the less he knocks on her door for her garden. And suddenly the sexual intimacy in the marriage is waning because he feels rejected. Well, every time I ask, you say no, so I feel rejected. So I'm just going to go take care of myself. And when he uses porn, it can become almost as exciting, if not more exciting for him than being with her. And so he quits knocking as often, and so then she begins to say, well, what's wrong with me? And then all of a sudden, they're missing each other in their lives sexually. They're just missing each other, back and forth. And the guy's taking care of business, and she's wondering why they never have sex anymore. And I know a lot of couples that get down the road, and they just don't make love very much anymore. That's not the way God designed it to be. But it's truth. It happens. And then that opens up all sorts of opportunities then for sexual sin and affairs. And it's heartbreaking. But it starts because she starts saying no, and instead of him dealing with that in verbal communication, he just goes and takes care of himself. And that's where it all breaks down. And so I heard a counselor say one time, and I think this is very wise advice. First of all, you got to communicate verbally about sex. For some reason, it's this beautiful thing we love to do. We just feel uncomfortable talking about it. How is that? How is that I feel more comfortable looking at my wife's naked body than I do talking to her about looking at her naked body? How does that happen? But it does, and so we don't talk about it. And what needs to happen is when she starts saying, not tonight, I have a headache, they need to start talking about why not, and they need to start talking about frequency, and they need to start talking about, okay, when can we then? And the counselor that gave this advice I thought was so wise is he said, you have to understand that sex and marriage is not about self-fulfillment, it's about serving the other person. So first of all, as the man, I need to learn some patience. Just because I get an erection doesn't mean I have to have an orgasm. And so I think it's a little unrealistic for her just to be at my beck and call anytime I want it. The other side of that is a woman may be tired and not ever feel like it. Well, she can't just put her husband off forever. There's got to be verbal communication where she says, I will serve you by having sex with you sometimes when I don't feel like it. And he says, I will serve you by not fulfilling myself anytime I want it and being patient with you in this regard. And the counselor said this, he said, make a pact with one another to never have an orgasm out of each other's presence. In other words, husband and wife come together, and husband, if you need to have an orgasm, even if she's not in the mood, have her there with you. Maybe part of her sacrifice is she is in bed with you while the orgasm takes place. But I think it's a wonderful piece of wisdom. If you're in a married relationship, make a covenant with one another never to have an orgasm outside of each other's presence. And that takes that going to his own garden out. It takes pornography out, and it takes the temptation out, and it builds that communication back to where you can build a sexual relationship even into your latter years where both of you are fulfilled and both of you probably not as often as one person wants it and probably too often for the other, but it's a balance of serving one another in the sexual arena. I think that's really, really important. The fourth scene of the Song of Solomon is when they come back together, and it's the confirmation of their commitment to one another. Listen to what it says here. I'm going to begin in verse 7. Chapter 7. How beautiful are your sandaled feet, O queenly maiden. Your rounded thighs are like jewels, the work of a skilled craftsman. Your navel is perfectly formed like a goblet filled with mixed wine. Between your thighs lies a mound of wheat bordered with lilies. Your breasts are like two fawns, twin fawns of a gazelle. Your neck is as beautiful as an ivory tower. Your eyes are like the sparkling pools in Heshbon. So he continues on. So now they've come back together. And they've come back together, and he's back in lust with her again. He's back enamored with her body again. See, God designed us to really, you can be with the same partner for 30, 40, 50 years and still be enamored with each other's bodies. You just have to be willing to sacrifice your own selfish ambition sexually to serve the other person. And when both are compromising, they come back together and it's beauty. But listen to what the one woman says in verse 10 of chapter 7. I am my lover's, and he claims me as his own. And then look at 8:6. Place a seal over your heart like a seal on your arm, for love is as strong as death, its jealousy as enduring as the grave. And so after they go through this time of confusion in their marriage where they're missing each other sexually, they finally come back to this mature place in marriage where they've learned to communicate and learned to sacrifice and learned to come back together. And now they're saying, hey, we get it now. This is a union till death do us part. This is forever. There's never anybody else. There's never fulfillment of self. It's you and me, and we're going to enjoy each other's bodies because that's the way God designed it to be. And there's this commitment to it. And the frequency, no. But the beauty, better than ever. So, how did God design sex? Why did he give us this sex drive? And does he care about our sex drive? Yes, he does. Yes, he does. And he gave us a whole book of the Bible to talk about it. And here's what he says about your sex drive. It's given you by God. It's designed within the parameters of his wisdom. This is the principle for how he set up sex to be done between husband and wife. And during that process of husband and wife in a long marriage, there's going to be phases. And there's going to be the phase where you're having sex all the time. There's going to be the phase when you're missing each other. And there's going to be the phase where you come together and learn to talk about it and learn to work out your differences so you can have that beautiful sex life to the sunset of your lives together. And God says, that's the way I designed it. So if you're married, here's my advice to you. Watch this video with your spouse and have a conversation about never having an orgasm outside of each other's presence. That would be my advice to you. If you're single, what's my advice to you? Listen to God's wisdom. I know it sounds awfully binding. I get that. But listen to his wisdom, because it just causes complications outside of the parameters of the way he set it up. Now, I want you to know there's nothing in the Bible that I can find that says masturbation in and of itself is wrong. Lust is wrong. And so, yes, there is a time and an avenue by which you can have release, but you have to control your mind and watch your lust. And here's what I know from my single friends that follow God's principles. If you want lust, sex drive won't go away, but it will calm down, and it will be easily manageable. And the less you lust, the less you crave to lust. And you can actually live as a wonderful, potent man or woman of God without lusting after the opposite sex. And with that sex drive, it's kind of boiling underneath the surface, but it can stay under the control underneath the surface. So that is my wisdom to you if you are single. Probably didn't think you'd ever watch a video like this, but here it is. That's what God has to say from this book. There are other things he says other places that we're not covering. That's what he says about this book. That's his wisdom. Remember what wisdom literature asks? How should I live in this world? Song of Songs asks the question, how do I live in this world with my sexuality? And he just gave us the answer. Let's pray. Father, thank you. Thank you for this teaching. Thank you for this book. Thank you for caring about our sex lives. Thank you for telling us in no uncertain terms what our sexuality is supposed to be like. Thank you for that. And Lord, I pray that we would have the wisdom to become experts at walking within the boundaries of your protection. Thank you for loving us enough to protect us with the boundaries that you put in place sexually. In Jesus' name, amen. Hey, thanks for watching. God bless you. Have a great day.